In Revelation chapter 2, and we are going to be in verses 8 through 11. 8 through 11. Looking at the church of Smyrna tonight. So if you want to go and go there and see what the Lord has to say. As you can see here, we have our picture of Smyrna, and I'm going to put this up so we can have some pictures while we're studying today. We have Smyrna says this, and to the angel of the church in Smyrna writes the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be careful, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. So here we are in Smyrna. If you look here is Patmos. We have that's where John's writing from. Smyrna is right over here, as you can see. And last week we talked about Ephesus, so that's here. Smyrna is right there, so this letter would be moving on. And the city of Smyrna was the second largest city in the Roman province of Asia Minor. It is the only city of the 7 churches that actually still exist today. It is now modern day Izmir. I'm going there, and that's the modern day Izmir. There are about 200,000 people living in the city. In John's day, it was a city that had been resurrected from the dead. It had been destroyed 700 years earlier, and it was laying in ruins for 300 years. And Jesus may kind of be alluding to this in reference to his own resurrection. They had died but are alive in his greeting to the church. So this is what the city of Smyrna looks like today. But this here is it was a proud, prosperous, and beautiful city that it boasted of a famous stadium, had a library. I believe this is the library right here, and public theater. It was the largest one in Asia Minor at the time. It's believed that Smyrna may have been the birthplace of the poet Homer, the one who wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad, but it's not 100% certain. It was a city that was friendly with Rome, which means they heartily and very much welcomed Roman rule. In fact, in the year 195 BC, the city erected the temple of De Roma, which is the goddess Roma, which is the earliest recorded establishment to the Roman cults. And in 23 BC, they were granted permission by Rome to build a temple to the Emperor Tiberius. Caesar worship was very common and enforced in Smyrna, so it was very difficult to be a Christian and live in the city. Now, if you remember, some of these cities, they were under Roman rule at this time, and when we say Roman worship, Roman cult worship, or Caesar worship, what was happening at this time is that the people thought, or the Caesars considered themselves gods, and they demanded to be worshipped by the people, and they would erect temples and statues and stuff. So Caesar worship was a very common practice, and people were also persecuted and went through many tribulations when they did not give the Caesar the proper worship that they felt they deserved. But back to the church of Smyrna, we don't know a whole lot about the origins of the church. It was probably formed around the time that Paul was in Ephesus in his 3rd missionary journey. Ignatius was an apostolic father, and he wrote in the early 2nd century that the church of Smyrna was well organized, had elders, deacons, and a bishop, whose name was Polycarp, who was ordained as bishop by the Apostle John. Now, you may have remembered, if you were in our church history class, you may have remembered the name Polycarp. He wrote a letter to Polycarp and to the church of Smyrna. So Polycarp is believed to have been the bishop at this time and ordained by John. Now, Polycarp is believed to have been a disciple of the Apostle John, and at the age of 86, he was burned at the stake for refusing to burn incense to the Roman emperor, which was that Caesar worship that we talked about. The story goes that the fires would not consume him. It's believed that he was stabbed ultimately and killed because the fires would not consume him. And his account is one of the first well-documented non-biblical martyr stories. Now, what I mean by non-biblical is that it's not recorded in the Bible. It's an extra biblical account. That doesn't mean that it's not legit. It means that it's just not in the Bible. And we look at this, it was fitting because the Apostle John wrote to the church concerning the persecution that was impending. So that's what the church of Smyrna was kind of in at this time. Now, this is the second letter that was written to the churches, and it's the second letter of the Apocalypse of Revelation. It's written by John, spoken by Jesus. Smyrna is the first of two churches who does not receive a rebuke from Jesus. Now, this letter opens with a traditional greeting to the angel of the church of Smyrna, and then identification of the one who is speaking. Like I said last week, it refers to something back to the vision of Jesus. And in this case, it says, Jesus proclaims that he was dead and is now alive. And like I said earlier, this could be in reference to the fact that the city at one time was dead and it was resurrected and is now alive. This could be the reference to that fact. Since it was once a city that ceased to exist, but then was rebuilt and brought back to life. That's just a little bit of history behind the letter to help us get a historical perspective. Now, in verse 9, when we move on after chapter 2, verse 8, the first thing that Jesus does is he acknowledges their hardships or their tribulations. That word tribulation could be anguish, burden, affliction. So we are understanding that the church was facing some sort of persecution. It was a persecuted and poor church that was located in a wealthy city, and it is believed pretty much that the two, persecution and poverty, go hand in hand. We see this often. The church was persecuted because they refused to bow the knee to Rome. They refused to give the Caesar the worship. They refused to acknowledge Rome as their god or whatever, their Caesar as God. And the church, they did not recognize Caesar as a deity. They refused to offer worship to him, and they refused ultimately to renounce their faith, because that's part of what Caesar worship was. You had to renounce your Christian faith in order to basically hold to Caesar worship. In this kind of violent environment, it's no wonder that people of the church were poor. Most likely they were unable to get jobs because of their faith. You think about the fact that these are Christians, and they were openly Christian, and people wouldn't hire them because why would you? Because they were defiant at that time. And so the reality was that the people who attended this church were very vocal about their faith, but they were also probably destitute and had very little possessions. And the people of Smyrna, they gave up everything to follow Jesus. These people, they didn't mess around. They weren't like, I don't feel like going to church today, I'm going to sleep in. That's not the kind of people we're dealing with here. We're dealing with people who are full on 100% sold out for Jesus. They gave up everything to follow Jesus. And they did not compromise their loyalty to him by bending the knee to Rome in exchange for a life of comforts, which I'm sure was a temptation. I mean, you think of that. It's faced with a situation even in our own lives today, you know, hopefully, prayerfully, and hopefully, I should say that given that choice in our own lives, we would make the same choice that the Church of Smyrna did, where they were saying, you know what, um, kind of like Jesus when he was talking to Satan in the desert, where Satan says, "If you do these three things, then I will do this." And basically, Jesus says, "Get away from me, Satan." Satan was trying to offer to him something better in um, what he would consider better in return or exchange for bending a knee to worship him. And and as humans, as Christians today, we have times where we can maybe be a little lax in our convictions because we don't want to cause a problem, or because we don't want to stir the pot, so to speak, because you think of it, some people are like, well, churches especially, where it's like, well, this group of people are wealthy, and we don't really want to upset these people, because if we do, then they may stop coming and they may quit giving, and we may not meet budget. Okay, so we're not going to be so strong on the sin issue, or the repentance, or whatever, something that, or whatever that may be, that would potentially cause someone to be offended, and to respond that way. And these individuals, they refused. They said, you know what, take away the money, take away the comfort, take away all of these false empty promises that you're going to give to us, so that we will do what you want us to do. um, we don't want that. We want to follow Jesus. We want to follow him 100%. And I know I gave a couple examples, but can you all think of any kind of? We don't have to use names or real life examples if we don't want to, or we can say I know somebody who, or whatever. But it's times where we see people um, um, compromising their faith in exchange for comfort or power or something. Do any of you have any situations you could think of that maybe happened to you personally, or maybe you saw from a distance, or you just see on TV?
I think sports is one thing where people compromise their faith. They will go to the games Sundays instead of going to church.
Yeah. We don't see that at our church ever. Nowadays, at least. Nobody does, but
Sure.
but that's true. There's some people that they would, and I'm going to the game. Sports, exactly.
Well, I was thinking kind of the same thing. People get a boat. Well, Sunday's my only day I have off.
Yeah.
And
I like to worship on
I've
the
heard
church
that
of
more
the
than
water.
once. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, but I've heard that, from different people. Well, it's my only day off, and I've got a $40,000 boat, and I need to use it.
Right. Right. Anything else that we can think of? I mean, we've seen this in leaderships, around the church world, where it's like, um, whether it's pastors, leaders, authors, whoever, who have compromised their integrity, because they've chosen that, what they would rather live the good life rather than live the poor life. I mean, we see this often in the prosperity movement, where individuals will they'll be like, I need we need a Learjet to get us to. Here's a personal story that I've heard somebody actually. I didn't tell me personally, but I watched it on the internet. Is a pastor who, I think I might use it. I think it was Copeland, um, but he basically said that he needed to raise enough money to buy a jet, because he couldn't fly coach to do missions work, because that's just not what God would want him to do. Flying coach isn't the way. If God wanted him to do work, he would give to him a nice Learjet, or just a jet, so that he can go to wherever he needs to go to do the missions work that he had to do. And I think it was Kenneth Copeland that I heard that from, but he's one of the it's not like he's a secret that he's a prosperity gospel teacher. So I'm not unmasking anything crazy, but I remember hearing that, like, well, I need more. God doesn't want me to be poor. He wants me to be wealthy. He wants you to be wealthy. He wants you to be comfortable. He wants you to be happy. And I don't want to deny the fact that God doesn't bless people. God does bless individuals. Some people, who are born again Christians, and God has given to them a wealth of finances, and he's blessing them, and they're faithful in it. But I don't know if God is not, well, I don't know. God is not necessarily interested in our comfort as much as he is interested in our dependency on him. And sometimes he has to take things away from us in order for us to be completely dependent on him. I've learned that lesson over life. I've lost things before because, but in that it's easy when we lose something, it's easy for us to get angry and upset about it and say, I was treated unfairly. But when you can look back on it and say, okay, well, that happened because God was teaching me to be more dependent on him, to be dependent on him and not to be dependent on other things. So this is, you guys all get what I'm kind of preaching right now, which I don't need to be doing that, but you guys all know what this is about. So we're kind of bringing it into perspective there. But here Jesus tells them something very interesting, and this is something that we need to hold on to as well. It says that Jesus is reminding them that yes, they are poor. You're poor folk. You're poor folk. You don't have a lot of money. But James 2:5 reminds us, where it says, "Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to those who love him?" That's James 2:5. They are poor financially, but spiritually speaking, he says, you're rich. These are words of comfort and encouragement to the church, I believe. Jesus reminds them in these few words that the things of the world do not make you wealthy. The things that are important for us as Christians, salvation, redemption, that future glory that God has promised us, they may have contributed to the individuals of this church being materially poor individuals. However, they were the richest people on the planet. And in contrast, Jesus is speaking about the Jews who are a synagogue to Satan. What we know is that the persecution of Smyrna does not just come from pagan Rome. It was also coming heavily from the Jews. If you think about that, if you remember, even in our church history class, a lot of the early persecution that was happening among the church was not necessarily from the outside pagans. It was coming from the Jewish people. The Jews were still hostile against those who followed Jesus. We need to remember that the Jews believed Jesus was a blasphemer. And when they saw the success of Christianity, when they saw evangelism working, they wanted to stop what was happening. They would physically harm Christians, and they would inform Roman rulers of these Christians and their worship practices. And in a city like Smyrna, this was common. They basically had people who would go out and tattle on individuals. Like, hey, there's a group of Christians meeting this week in Joe Smith's house. You might want to go check it out. And these Jews thought that they were true Jews. Okay, but they were in fact, Jesus says, a synagogue to Satan. They were not working for the God of Israel. In fact, they were doing the work of the devil. And that's not and that's not meaning to be an anti-Semitic statement. It was just more of a reality at this time, is that the Jewish people and the Christians did not see eye to eye on things. The Jews wanted to stop Christianity. And you think of the words, of, I can't remember the name of the high priest or the priest at the time that said, if this is from God, we can't stop it. But if it is from God, it's going to go away. do you, Harry, remind me, who was the person that said it? Do you remember?
Gamaliel, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Pardon?
it was Gamaliel.
Gamaliel, wasn't it?
Is it? What were you gonna say?
Yes.
Is that what you're gonna say too, Grace?
Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
it was Gamaliel.
Gamaliel.
Okay. Yeah, that name I couldn't think of it off the top of my head, but I'm glad that you guys know it. So, but you remember they said that he said that, if it's gonna fail, it'll go away. But if it's of God, who are we to stop it? And that's kind of, we see that Christianity is still around, so it hasn't failed, thankfully. But here in verse 10, Jesus tells us, or tells them, and even us as well, if we want to apply it to ourselves, do not fear, because hardships are coming. Do not fear. Now we need to listen to that and let that sink in. He says, do not fear the persecution that's coming. It's easy for us to hear those words of comfort of do not fear. Oh, okay, I'm not going to fear, Lord, because persecution's coming. Oh, wait, I didn't know. Wait a second. I don't want you to say that part, Lord. But the reality is that tough times are ahead for this church, and Jesus is telling them to not allow this fear to overtake them. They're about to face some heavy persecution. And he informs them who is behind this scheme. Jesus says the devil is going to throw some of you into prison. Some have speculated the devil may be symbolic of Rome, and they certainly were the ones who were going to instigate this persecution. But it also is believed that it's the devil himself. We know that the devil is an accuser. He accuses people. We see that in Job, and we know that that's what his job is he accuses, and when he accuses, persecution happens. And we can see that he would be the one who is influencing individuals behind the scenes. And certainly the people must remember the words of Jesus in Matthew 10:28. Do not fear the one who can kill the body, but not the soul. Jesus has given them that reminder. Okay, you're facing humans here. You're facing humans, and you can't be afraid of them because I'm with you. Now, when we think about what was in store for them, was prison, was basically being placed in a place of locked down. The ancient world's prison, it wasn't like prisons today. Restoration and rehabilitation were not the purposes of prison at that time. They didn't have televisions. They didn't have good 5 square meals a day. They didn't have, little library cart going around, all these things that you hear about the today. It's the prison was where you were when you were sent to die, and the accused were sent there to await execution. What are you looking at? My son's looking at me. Hold on for 1 second. Just 2 hamburgers and a small fry. Making my dinner order. Sorry. That's jail, prison was a place where people were sent to die. Jesus wasn't telling them that they were going to spend a night in jail, like being thrown in the drunk tank. He was telling them that this will end in death for many in this church. And he uses specific 10 days. Now, this could suggest a literal 10 days, or it could suggest a short time. And others suggest that it could be a long but limited period of time. So we have, the literal, it could just be figurative and a short time, or it could be it's a longer time, but it's going to be a limited period of time. But regardless of what it meant, persecution was coming. And Jesus was saying, be faithful, remain faithful, even to the point of death. And he gives them a promise. If they remain faithful, what do they receive?
Crown of life.
Life. The word for crown here refers to the wreath or garlands, which was given as the prize for victors in a competition. This is the reward that we think of the medal, but this is the word here is probably more that wreath of garland, which is the victorious crown. And he says, he who has an ear, the one who conquers, will not be hurt by the second death. Conquerors, we will overcome. In John 16, Jesus tells his disciples that he has overcome the world.
Amen.
Since he has overcome, they, the church, and ultimately we, are overcomers. And he is saying the world will cause great persecution, great trials and tribulation, but have courage because I have overcome the world. The world has no power over us because of Jesus. John reminds us in his epistle also that those who are born of God through Jesus have overcome the world. The second death has no power over those of us who are in Jesus.
Amen.
That crown of life, that victorious crown that we get placed upon our head, is something that we can hold on to during these times, these difficult times of tribulation. So ultimately, when we come down to all of this, what does all of this have to do with us today? When we look at the Church of Smyrna, and we look at what God is or what Jesus is saying to the church, and how we can take something with us tonight. How can we? What can we take with us? And I have a few suggestions, and as I always do, but feel free to add some of your own if you can think of some as I'm going along. And the first one is when we look at this church, okay, they were a church that was not gonna give up. They were gonna stay faithful. So the first step, the first suggestion for us is as believers is that the compromise is not an option. Okay, there is no doubt that we live in a world that is hostile towards Christianity. I mean that's apparent. The world is not tolerant of Christianity. It embraces compromise. It looks at Christianity as a religion that is separate. That's just for a specific group of people, and they're not open-minded. They're whatever. People, even those who claim to be followers of Jesus, they compromise their faith in exchange for comfort, for wealth, for status. And the reality about following Jesus is that following Jesus is costly, but it's worth every penny, spiritually speaking. Okay, it's worth it. Following Jesus is costly, but worth it. And there are so many things out there that demand that are demanding our hearts and demanding our affection and enticing us to bow our knees to it. And the truth is that only Jesus satisfies. There's no other satisfaction in anything other than Jesus. So as Christians, we can't compromise our loyalty, our love, and our life to Jesus for something that is ungodly, that is empty, and ultimately cannot deliver. So compromise is not an option. Secondly, no matter how poor you are, we need to realize that we are extremely, extremely wealthy. You may, and I certainly don't have material wealth. God is not concerned with our spiritual wealth as much as he is concerned with our spiritual health. Material wealth means little in the kingdom of God. And no matter what our financial status is, if you're a child of God, then you are the richest person in the world. You have what many who have everything materially, but nothing spiritually, do not have. We have salvation. We have redemption. We have hope. We have glory, the future glory. And it is Jesus who makes us the richest people on the planet. And lastly, the last thing I take out of this is that we have overcome because Jesus has overcome. We need to be continually reminded about this, about the fact that we are overcomers. We are victorious in life because Jesus was victorious on the cross. The world has no hold on us, and we're not slaves to it. The words Jesus speaks to us tells us that there's little to nothing that the world can do to take that away from us. The world cannot take away our joy. The world cannot take away our salvation. The world can't take away our redemption. It will certainly try, but we know that in turmoil, and pain, and suffering, and persecution, we can find joy. let this truth be in our foundation. Be our foundation, I should say. We live in a time of uncertainty. We live in a time of violence. We live in a time of godlessness. We live in a time of amoralism. We live in a time of turmoil. But all of these things should not affect our lives one bit, because Jesus is still on the throne. Okay? We have overcome the world because we belong to Jesus. And he is the victor, thus we are victorious as well. So we need to hold on to that. We are victorious. We need to remain faithful in Jesus, because Satan will try and strike. But we have to just hold on to that fact that we have the crown, that crown of life, the crown of victory, the crown of overcoming. So that's just some things that I take from this tonight. I know, like I said last week, these messages to the church sound more preachy than they are study, but I certainly don't want to take away the interaction as well. And so, does anyone have any thoughts or questions or things that they would like to add to that?
I think the song that said, "I never promised you a rose garden, but we must persevere."
That could fit. Yes.
Jeff, we walked with some of the poorest people in Asia for years, and Pastor Virna up in Palakamandi, these names just don't matter, in India, had Coke bottle glasses that were cracked. He made $12 a month, equivalently serving a 6-pole thatch roof church with dirt floors. And one study we taught was church planning. And he was not by himself in this group. There were many rural Indian pastors. 6 months later, we came back to teach. Pastor Virna, who had lost an arm trying to keep wild pigs out of his garden, lost his house twice while wild elephants came in and stomped it down. In between all of these, he planted 3 more pole thatch roof churches and trained 3 young men that would study with him on Saturday night to go and preach what he put together as a sermon in the 4 churches. He was a rich man. Our standards, we wouldn't even turn and look at him. We would consider him a scraggly beard beggar. In God's eyes, he was rich.
I'm sure you got many more stories like that.
Too many.
Yes. And that's why we look at the spiritual wealth, that we have is far greater than the material wealth. And like I said, I don't ever want to, if God is blessing somebody, I don't ever want to say that they're wrong, because I can't, God does choose to bless some people financially and others not. I'm one of those people, but I'm not complaining, because, where God has me is in a perfect place. So,
Amen.
Yeah. So any other thoughts on that? And that's kind of hard to follow a story like that, but anyone else have thoughts on this? Your silence is deafening.
It's golden.
What's that?
I said silence is golden sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna just stay on the one church a week just for now, because there's just so much stuff in there, and I think I gave you quite a bit of information and thoughts on that. But I'm trying to think of some good questions. I'm horrible at asking questions. I always just like, so what do you guys think? And nobody says anything. So if any of you guys can think of good questions to ask, I would love to throw them out at you. I can just ask a simple little question. You know, when you face I don't want Sunday school answers here. I want real answers. When you're faced with trials and persecutions, and it doesn't have to be, I'll just take out the word persecution because we don't really know what persecution means. Trials. When we face trials in our lives, what is our natural inclination? What is our natural response to to these trials?
I think if it's catastrophic, it's fear.
Okay, we respond in fear. Okay, what are
We
some
say,
other?
why me?
Yeah, why me? Pity party, right? Yep, that is our natural. Yep. Wait, good.
Anger.
Yep. And when you think about that, though, you know, naturally we say all of these things that you guys have just said, but Jesus tells us, the Bible tells us very specifically to respond differently. So how do we respond differently if that's our natural inclination to respond that way? How is it that we can respond in a way that when trials or hardships come our ways that we can embrace them and use it to glorify God? What are
Well,
some?
that's the first thing we think. After the first fear or whatever, then your mind starts analyzing things. Then you think differently.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think if you can get to the point where you're thankful, just thankful that you're a Christian, that you love Jesus, that you have so many other blessings, that this doesn't, it's not as serious as you might have thought it was.
Right.
Amen.
If we really believe, I guess it brings us to a point to analyze if we really believe what we say we believe, that God is in control. And if God is in control and we really believe that, then He has permitted this in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And He has permitted, I'm just speaking from some of my own experience, having gone through cancer and gone through chemo. And I was young at the time. I was in my early 30s and my kids were little. And it was something that the Lord had permitted. And depending on your response to it, you can either choose to see the wonderful things that it brings to your life that you may never, ever have if you don't go through it, as hard as it may be. And it allows you to become more compassionate towards others who are going through those things.
Right.
So,
And that's not.
I guess get down to the nitty-gritty about what you really believe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you boil it down too, is it's not easy either. It's not something that we can just do. We can't just flick a switch off in our life and turn off all emotions and be like, okay, God, we're fine with everything. Let's move on to the next thing. You know, it's certainly a process. I would assume, as going through it.
I would sit in church and they'd start singing songs about heaven. And like happy songs,
Uh-huh.
and I would have tears streaming down my face because I didn't know if I was going to be there to see my children grow up.
Mm-hmm.
Yet that didn't mean you weren't trusting God.
Right.
But through it, there were just things that that helped you become a much more sensitive and compassionate person.
Hmm.
So,
It's interesting that you mentioned that we were actually talking about that at staff meeting this Tuesday about, worshiping and, talking about um, wanting to see. It wasn't me saying this, it was the worship leader. He loves it when people are excited, and when they're excited, it's showing that they're truly worshiping. And we kind of brought to his attention that, sometimes people, when they're not jumping around or raising their hands or doing that, that doesn't necessarily mean we're not worshiping. Like in
right,
your instance there, you were still worshiping in that time. It's just that you weren't worshiping in the way that maybe some people would say that you have to worship. Like,
right.
well, you weren't just holding your hands up and saying, I'm trusting you. I mean, you were literally saying, I don't know if I'm gonna be here next week, and you're thinking, I may not see real things that were
Right.
ministering to you at that, or were I don't want to say ministering, but were real to you at that time. And
Mhm.
that, as you said, it was a way of God was shaping you and turning you into, uh, trusting in Him, all of those things, and that's just it's a powerful thing, to go through and to learn, because, boy, I tell you, um, when we're in the midst of those times, joy is not the first thing we think of, is it?
No.
You know?
But there were things that were joyful about
Yeah,
it.
I'm sure, but
But it's,
certainly, go ahead.
no, that's all right.
I said, and not to discredit. I don't want. Wasn't discrediting that either. But I would probably certainly would say that, as definitely as you look back on it, you could definitely see it differently now than you did back then. Obviously, because you're on the other side of it. Uh,
Exactly. Agree.
but the reality is, though, that you can have joy during that time, and I don't want to just say it's not something that comes easy, because maybe to some people it does, but to me, for me personally, it does not. When I'm in the midst of hardships and trials, I tend to go down the road of bitterness, the road of anger, the road of um, poor old me. That's that tends to be the road I go down, and I'm not proud of that, but when I emerge from it, I do believe that I emerge stronger in my faith, and not because of my grit, but because of what God has shown to me, and how He's changed my life. So, I can go through these hardships and these trials. I've shared many of those with you, with some of those trials and hardships that I've had in my life, as I've shared some of my testimonials with you all. And it's a process for me, especially. I got to go from that anger, bitterness, right here, to trusting God, and being able to be like, okay, what happened back here? It's done, it's gone. It still has imprints on my life, but it doesn't affect my my current situation or my current relationship with the Lord. And if anything, it's helped me to grow. So yeah, um, all that to say is that it's definitely not always an easy thing to go through when we're going through trials and tribulation. It's hard, not always easy to have joy, but certainly not impossible. Any other stories or thoughts on that?
Well,
Well, oh, go
Go.
ahead, Judy.
you go first.
Well, I was just going to say, I know Diane and Judy are probably sick of hearing this story, but when my husband was sick and was put in the hospital with leukemia, he had a good attitude, and his doctor asked him to go talk to a woman who was in with the same type of leukemia, who had a what was me, no fight at all. And so Joe started talking to her, and he tried to witness to her, and her comments were, "Yeah, I've heard about God. Yeah, I've read about it," and kind of blew him off.
Mm,
But he never gave up. And after his third round of chemo, which was about, well, his chemos lasted a whole week of 24 hours a day. And he'd be home for a couple of weeks and have to go back and forth. And in January, he started in October. In January, he was home and saw her obituary in the paper.
Mm.
And I mean, he just broke down that he never got through to her.
Mm.
And when the leukemia came back the second time, he knew all the nurses. He flirted with them all the time. And he said to one of them, "I was so sorry to hear about Eve." And they told him her last words were, "I know God."
Mm.
And so, you know, he's dancing up in heaven with her now.
Mm.
And, you know, it's so we always felt that it was a purpose that.
Yeah.
And Joyce, we will never get tired of hearing that because it's so beautiful.
I was thinking the same thing, Judy. You beat me to it.
Well, in fact, we were still going to Palmview then, and Larry Pritchett actually used in one of his sermons.
Mm. Nice. And that's and I even spoke. I think I spoke a little bit on that this Sunday, where I said, you know, sometimes we don't live to see our legacy, and you know that was kind of a. And when we do, it's a moment of grace that God shows to us that you know, and when we leave a mark on someone's life, not because of who we are, but because of what He's done through us, you know, that's just a moment of grace where we can look back and say, wow, you used me in that situation, Lord, and I'm not taking credit for it, but the fact is that you used me, and that just kind of gives you that boost of, you know, God will use anybody. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else? Well, let us remember that crown of life. Then, you know, that's what we have to hold on to. And you know, I know you all have your situations that you're in your life, and I don't know them all specifically, but I hope that tonight's message or tonight's study or time together was encouraging to you. I certainly don't want it to be like I said, I want it to come across as preachy, but hey, you put a Bible in a preacher's hand, that's what we do.
Exactly.
So if you want something different, you have to get somebody different. So, but no, we'll get into some more looking at the churches, and then after we're done with the churches, then we'll get into some of the crazy stuff. But I think we need to slowly trudge through these churches in order for us to get a good glimpse of what the rest of Revelation is saying, because we got to constantly remember that this is a prophecy given to the seven churches, and these seven churches are important, and whether we're viewing them, like I said, as the complete church, or we're looking at them individually, or we're looking at them as dispensationally throughout history, it's important. So we need to look at what God is saying to us through these seven churches. So that's I thank you for just taking, you know, an hour of your life and spending it with me tonight, and with each other, and learning a little bit about the Church of Smyrna and about the victorious life that Christ has given to us. That's the main thing we want for you to take tonight. You have the crown of life. You are victorious. So, all right. Before we close with prayer, last call for any comments, questions, snide remarks. You can keep the snide remarks to yourself, as usual.